That's good. I'm so glad that, yeah, I'm so glad that they got to meet you. I know they were kind of in awe, like, he's like, they're like, we never get anybody like that. You know, so it was great that they got to talk and learn a lot. That's the thing.
It's a really good exchange too.
That's good.
My whole point of that is just to try to encourage them to be involved.
Well, yeah, that's and a couple of the kids are like really want to be involved, which is great.
Yeah, good. That's what I want to see.
Yep.
Definitely want to see that.
Yeah. Well, I think they bring it up to spec me, spec, and cover the first 2 years operation. Yeah, I don't know, because that's the stuff, the number she provided has chemicals, and obviously, it's, like I said, it's gonna go out.
She's not man hours, labor, you know what I'm saying? She doesn't have any labor.
She's got her hours in it, she's got her salary in there.
Yeah, but see, that's just her shift. That's just, that doesn't include benefits and all this other stuff.
Well, and I added the burden rate in, because I figured out we're carrying for burden rate. I'll show you the numbers.
Yeah, but you see what I'm saying? So some of the numbers you see, it's great, but it doesn't show behind the scenes costs.
Double.
At
I
least.
know, we know that already.
Yeah.
That's what I'm telling you.
How are you?
Place to cut through here.
Hello? I'm doing good, buddy. How you doing?
It was a good meeting.
I brought way too much big. Everything to you?
Let him do all the talking then.
No, I brought him for Pam, so I wanted to see Matt.
I know it. I'm the same.
Orders and
That's the best part.
I'll take it. I'll take this.
They asked if it was okay.
oh, yeah.
Until they give up. You got your shot.
Kick you in the teeth.
Oh, yeah. I was sat front because I couldn't see if I didn't.
I've got to get the kid at 2:15.
2:30.
Hey, Phil, how are you?
Pam, how are you? Good to see you.
How's
What's
Pam
going
doing?
on?
Huh?
How you doing? Good to see
Good
you.
to see you.
Thank you, thank you.
Hi there.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So, thank you all for coming this afternoon. I think we better get right to it. We've got a lot of things to cover here. I'm Andrea Tillinghast, and I am your library director here at Ford Memorial Library. I do know that some people that did register have opted to watch the program live streaming, which we've got our IT guy here doing for us. So it is being live streamed right now. And I'm going to give each of our panelists a moment to just briefly introduce yourself or make any comments, general comments you want to make about the closure of Willard Drug Treatment Campus. And then we'll move through the program. It'll work like this. I'll pose 5 to 8 questions or topics, and then you can answer popcorn style, meaning just jump right in and answer. And then I'll let everyone that wants to answer take their turn. We'll move on to the next slide. So that's pretty much the structure today.
Yes.
So, Steve, do you want to go first?
Sure.
Introduce yourself, just tell us a little bit about your perspective on the closure.
Absolutely, sure. I'm Steve Parker-Zielinski. I'm the superintendent at South Seneca. For me, for the longest time, I've been talking about how South Seneca, in the southern part of this county, is the third largest employer in the area, behind 5 Points and Willard. So every time I think about this closure, I think 300 jobs, 300 jobs, 300 jobs. So we know how important it is to offer employment in the county, the ripple effect in the economy, the hundreds of ways that it makes a difference to the way of life in the county. And so as I think about what it means for the area, I always come back to the loss of the jobs. And so people ask me what I think, are projected into the future. I don't know, sort of a year-by-year prospect to see what all the indirect effects will be. But there's no getting around it. This is devastating news for the area.
If you want to introduce yourself, Marty? and tell
Sure,
us a
Marty
little bit.
Gratz. I'm the superintendent at Romulus Central School District, just up the road from us. I'll echo many of the things that Steve had said, that as I sit here, I don't feel so much that I'm represent a school, I represent another employer in the area. And we have 125 people there who take care of 446 students each day. I'd love to be able to say that we could absorb 300 more people and have 425 people working at Romulus School, but we can't. And we know that large percentage of the people that work anywhere in the area live in the area. Some folks drive in from the outside, but the majority are from right here in these local towns. So they're living, they're paying taxes, they're working in these towns. So anytime something happens to any one of us, it affects the rest. And we will have families in our district that will be impacted by the Willard Drug Treatment Center closure and the ripple effects that radiate out from that. So we're here in support and also recognizing that as employers together, anytime employment changes for anybody, it impacts all of us.
We're fortunate enough to have our Assemblyman and our Senator here with us. So if you want to just talk a little bit about your perspective, Assemblyman Palmisano.
Sure, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I wish I wasn't here discussing what we're discussing. Unfortunately, the closure of Willard Drug Treatment Center is one of 6 closures that was announced just before Thanksgiving. Last year at this time, there were 4 facilities announced for closure just before Christmas. This will meet 29 facilities closed since 2009. And we're talking about the devastating impact this has on employees and their families. We're talking about over 300 employees, 208 corrections officers, and about 120 civilian staff. This has a devastating impact on the local communities, our towns, our counties, and our schools. We're very, very frustrated by the lack of transparency and communication, communication and the lack of notice that was not presented in this, finding out through the media. One thing that, under the law, you're supposed to give 1-year notification on a closure, but the Democratic legislature gave to the governor a fast-tracking ability of 90 days. And this governor chose to take that up and look at a 120-day closure. That just adds insult to injury to the brave men and women who work in these facilities. That's not enough time to decide on whether you're going to up and relocate to another part of the state, to another facility. We've known people who've been at one facility was closed, they relocated to another facility, now that facility is being closed. Some people have been impacted multiple times. This is a total, complete lack of respect for the families and those employees who have been, and also ignoring in the law that they're supposed to have an adaptive use plan that's not there. This is really an unfortunate pattern that Senator Helming and I and our colleagues have seen from this administration and from the previous administration and the Democratic majorities in Albany. They say they want to repurpose this for alcohol and drug rehabilitation, but what is Willard? That's what they do, that's their job, that's their mission, and they're successful at doing it. Why are we closing something that works and is successful? We should be looking to put more people in that facility if we want to help those people, not closing it down. On top of the fact, they've invested over $42 million in that facility over the past 5 years for electrical work, roof, heating, and other. Those things are supposed to be taken into consideration in some of these closures, but they're not. And they have no answer when we talk to the Department of Corrections. They talk around and they talk a big game. And unfortunately, what this is really going to lead to outside of Willard closing down is what we continue to see happening in our correctional facilities around the state. An increasing rise in violence inside our correctional facilities. In the past 5 years, inmate on staff assaults has increased over 38%. Inmate on inmate assaults have increased over 31%. The inmate population is down 10,000 people over the past year, which is still hard to understand. I mean, I know they were releasing people with COVID, but there's an unchecked parole board on top of it. The prison population has decreased from 57,000 in 2010 to 31,000 now. So what the corrections fails to address is with these closures and the decrease in prison population, how did this violence continue to rise and increase? It's because of these closures are creating a dangerous powder keg environment inside these facilities, and it's coupled with the failed policies, taking away tools from our corrections officers, like restricting the use of special housing units to segregate dangerous criminals and inmates from the rest of the population. No secure vendor program for drugs getting to our facilities, which we know is one of the causes of violence that's going on inside of our facilities. Senator Hawley and I have a program of legislation that would deal with contraband getting into our facilities, but it continues to get ignored year after year, which makes no sense. Using more drug dogs, and we know the drugs getting through the mail and through people, but they aren't using those resources. They keep taking those tools and resources away from those individuals working inside those facilities. And yet we continue to see that rise in violence going on. And when I talk about an unchecked parole board, this is concerning to me when I hear this statistic when we were doing some research. In 2019, first-time initial parole releases were 40%, and reappearances were 38%. But compared to 2014, it was 19% and 21% respectively. This parole board is releasing dangerous individuals into the street. Cop killers, child rapists, murderers. Every time you turn around, more and more individuals, dangerous individuals, are getting released to the street. And these are the policies that are the Democratic majorities in this administration, past and present, are advocating, and that's what's creating a dangerous environment in our communities. You see the rise in violence that's going on, whether it's in Rochester nearby, Buffalo, or New York City. The increase in violence is drastic. So really, we have a challenge ahead of us. But we need to make sure that we give the help to the individuals who need the help, and making sure that we're doing everything we can to support the employees there and do what we can to do that, because their plans for reopening, they always talk about repurposing. They don't have a very successful track record with the state. 29 closed facilities since 2009. Only 8 have been sold or repurposed. So there's not a good track record there. And that's the problem with these closures, and it just leads to more and more violence and more disruption, more hardship for dedicated employees who work a dangerous job to keep us and our communities safe. And they're being ignored and not taken care of. And it's very angry, it makes me very angry. I know it makes Senator Howling very angry, it makes our community very angry. But when these closures happen in a community like this, it has a devastating ripple effect beyond just closing a building. These individuals, as we talked about, our coaches on our Little League teams or parts of our boards, and it's just going to have a tremendous impact. And I'm just concerned. I'm sorry I talked so much. I'm just very, very frustrated and angry by what's going on.
We really appreciate your comments. Thank you, Assemblyman. Senator Hum?
Thank you. Andrea, I want to thank you so much for organizing this community forum. I think it's a great opportunity. I will admit that I look out and I see 9 people here. I see others who are associated with the library or staff. I was hoping that more people would be here to, share their concerns, ask their specific questions. And the reason why I say that is that for me, there's really 2 fundamental things that we need to address, and that's the loss of job opportunities, and as everyone has said up to this point, the ripple effects. These corrections officers, all the employees at Willard, right? They're just not employees of Willard. They're the coaches of our teams, they're school volunteers, they volunteer at hospice, so we're losing those resources that this community desperately needs. When I talked to docs, they assured me that everyone would have an opportunity, right, to get a new job. In a subsequent conversation with docs, I learned that's not exactly 100% true. When I asked questions about provisional appointments and more, there's some stumbling. So dealing with the closure, the impact to the corrections officers and everyone else, and the impact to the community, I know it's all joined together, but for me, I also wanted to focus on what are the things that we're not thinking about, and that was the hope that I had that I would get from people who attended this forum. Like, what are the other things that haven't been discussed yet that are going to be impacted because of the closure of Willard? I know we run food pantries out of there, the Office for the Aging runs out of there. There's so many other things. I led a discussion the other day. Supervisor Borst was on, Supervisor Hayes. We had the chairman of the board, the Seneca County Board of Supervisors, Bob Heisen on, Mitch Rowe, and we had a representative from DOCS on. And we tried to put together our list of everything we could come up with. Like we've all heard about the impacts to the water infrastructure, the proposed sewer expansion plan. There was discussion about the credit union. There was discussion about, the housing. 5 Points uses some of the facilities at Willard for housing, for training opportunities, and so much more. And I also had a personal push and a personal ask, which we're going to keep doing, and that's it to the state. Look, as someone in Palmisano said, we hear a lot about the reuse of these buildings. Butler Correctional Facilities in my district, it's been closed for a number of years, and it's doing nothing but rotting away. We don't want to see that happen here at Willard, so that's one of my priorities, is making sure that we take care of that and working with the county and the towns to find out, hey, to the Office of Government Services, can you transfer for $1 or something like Camp Edgemere? Can you transfer some of that very valuable property so that the county and the towns can work together and figure out some economic development or stimulus that can come out of this? It'll never take the place of the 300-plus jobs, but at least it will give us something. And I really feel like we have one opportunity to the state. Here's our list of items we need to make sure that we address. And today out of this forum, I'm hoping with your feedback, we can add to that list anything we may not have already thought about or included.
Yeah, we've got the people that are online streaming, and we're going to take some of the questions from them too at the end, so perhaps it'll give you some of that feedback. Thank you,
Great.
Senator. So we've got here representatives from our local municipalities, and first is Town of Oakwood Supervisor Joe Gorst.
Oh, thank you. Everybody here has already talked about a lot of great topics. To add on to a few of those, one big thing that Supervisor Hayes and I and the county board is working on is our sewer projects that we're trying to deal with. And Supervisor Hayes, I'll let him speak onto the water because he's in a little bit of predicament with the water for the hamlet of Willard. But we've got quite a big sewer project, and Docs has said that they are going to come up with their commitment on their portion of it. And I believe we got a letter from them stating that, but there's still more to that, like the O&M operating and maintenance costs that are associated with that, that obviously if Willard isn't using any water or sewer, they're not going to be putting into that. So it adds even more burden to our residents that are already taxed so thin that they can barely pay their bills. Couple that with, people have said, the Italian Kitchen, the Big M, the Dollar General, the gas stations, they're all dependent on, these employees coming into town every day, or living in town, the school, loss of kids in the school, which doesn't seem like, how many kids could there be? Well, even a few kids, like our band program is so sparse as it is, you lose a few more kids, does it make sense to even offer band anymore? Does it make sense to offer a club that only 2 kids are going to do? So, it takes opportunities away from the kids that could be there. And to add on what Pam said about reuse, if anybody's been down through Willard, you can probably see about 100,000 square feet of buildings that are falling in from last time. And I'd hate to see the new buildings that they put millions of dollars just fall into the ground. And that's a question that I kind of asked the guy from Docs. One, any plans on cleaning up those old buildings? No, we're going to just leave them the way they are. And after I think they said a year's time, they're shutting the heat off and they're boarding up and securing the property, and that's it if they don't have a reuse. So a lot of things really to consider there, because we just don't want any more eyesores. And if you look at the map, it's a big chunk of Ovid's lakefront property that the state owns down there, between the state, the DTC land, the Boy Scout camp. It's most of our Seneca Lake, prime lakefront that we could be drawing taxes from that the state is doing nothing with. So I would love to see if they're going to sell it off, again, work with us and let us figure out how we can do something that can bring some more money into the town, because
Which is the conversation that we had.
Yep,
Right?
yep.
And that we're memorializing so that we could get that out there to the
Absolutely,
state.
yep.
Yeah, good point, Joe. I hadn't thought of that. And here we've got the town supervisor, David Hayes from the town of Romulus, and the town of Romulus deputy supervisor, Mike Joslin. And so do you guys want to give your perspective?
Thank you. My perspective, I've done this once already with closure of the Seneca Army Depot, so this is nothing new. They're gonna tell you all kinds of stuff. It takes forever for anybody to turn the land over. It doesn't happen overnight. Even if the state wanted to give all of us the land and say, walk away and you guys can have it all, it's not gonna happen for at least 7 years by the time it goes through the legislative body to get rid of it. It doesn't happen that way. So, my thing is the governor is very big on rehabilitation. One thing that she does that I like, and it's probably the only thing, but it's, is that she's big on rehabilitation. She believes in it. She's big on doing that. She supports it a lot. So Oasis is already there. We have the buildings that housed the inmates. They can still be used to house, just not incarcerated. So why not use the housing to expand Oasis presence down there for rehabilitation, which it was used for, but just not make it an incarceration. So obviously you're not gonna have the guards there. They have the program, the state already has a program of the more is less. So let's use the more is less as an advantage to a facility that you wanna take inmates out of. You wanna close correctional facilities, fine, but reuse it as what it was used for. If it was used for incarcerating, to rehab the incarcerated, low-level offenders, let's still utilize it to rehabilitate after they've gone through a program, before they come out into the community, reintroduce them, go through the program, make sure they're good, send them out. We have a large facility for this. It's already there. They spent millions of dollars to make it that way, and to just not do anything. But again, that's what our representatives have to make sure happens, is everybody pushes, but really the ones that have to push are those guys. We can do everything we want, and believe me, we're trying, and it's not as easy as people think it is. They just don't give up the land. It just doesn't go away.
Yeah. What do you want to add, Mike?
Mike Joslin, Deputy Supervisor, Town of Romulus. I am a lifelong resident of the town of Romulus, and you know, I have just seen hammer blow after hammer blow to the southern Seneca communities. The depot closes, the Willard Psych Center closed. It just keeps going on and on and on. And this whole process with the DTC closing is just, it's ill-conceived, it's disturbing in the fact that there's such a lack of transparency.
Absolutely.
Such a lack of consideration for the people that are being impacted. And I'm just stunned by the fact that the hamlet of Willard gets their water from the water treatment plant operated by New York State on that facility. And then when Docs comes in and says, oh, we didn't know that. That's, how can you not know that? And how can you not investigate and take that into consideration?
And it's not the first time. I mean, they should know, because we've been through this process before, and they know, especially in our rural communities, that infrastructure at the correctional facilities is also interconnected with the local communities.
Yeah, it's just, I know that it's too late now. You can't undo what's been done, unfortunately. And we're just going to take another shot from this, but hopefully we can at least get someone's attention at Albany, and I really appreciate you guys standing up there and screaming into the wind, it seems like sometimes. But just start thinking about what they're doing, and try to help us to get through this situation.
And Andrew, if I may just comment too, because I think at this point, one of the things I'd like to say to people is that elections have consequences, right? Like Assemblyman Palmisano brought up, that this language was tucked in the bill, in the budget, multiple years. Look at who's voting for that stuff. Look at who's voting for that. And if you think that what happens at the state level doesn't have an impact on you, because a lot of people say that to me, I don't vote, it doesn't matter. It does matter, and this is a perfect example of why it matters. And just a quick comment on Oasis. That was one of my first discussions with Docs, was about Oasis. As Supervisor Hayes said, they're already there. Can they take over more? And that's in the discussion process now. They're talking about it. But those jobs will not compare in benefits or in pay to what they're taking away, right?
Sure,
so
sure.
I also want to be very careful that, well, yes, we'd like Oasis to expand because there's a need for those services. There's also a need for higher paying job opportunities in southern Seneca County.
So very true. So for those of you who are not aware, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction. I'm probably speaking to the choir here. But, so the Willard DTC was opened in 1995 on the site of the former Willard Psych Center, which was a facility for mental patients. And in addition to Willard, there are other prisons or corrections facilities that will be closed that were announced as well: Downstate, Mariah Shock, Ogdensburg, Rochester, and Southport. And they're all supposed to close on March 1st, 2022. So we've talked about some of these things, but a little bit about the population of Willard is it's men and women that are over 18 and over. They have to be second felony offenders. So meaning they already have a previous drug charge. I understand there was a little bit of change to that over the course of the last 5 or so years, where they started allowing people that didn't necessarily have drug offenses into the program. So I think, I'm not sure exactly how that happened, but yeah, I understand it's individuals sentenced to Class C, B, and E drug felonies, certain Class B and W non-drug felonies. So where originally it was set up to be just people who had first-time drug offenses. Now this number, we've heard a little bit different numbers announced here today, that there are 220 corrections officers and 200 civilian staff. So that might not be quite up to date as correct as the numbers that Assemblyman gave us. Does anyone know how many parolees are at Willard now?
I have it somewhere. That information was just shared with the 2 supervisors, myself, and others. I didn't bring my notes. I don't know if you remember.
I want to say it was like 160.
Yeah, 165, something like that.
And I think the biggest concern is that the number has decreased. And I think we would all be okay with that decrease, that if we felt that in our communities they were safer, right? But we have seen a dramatic uptick in horrendous violent crime, so it makes no sense. But then you add, Supervisor Hayes just mentioned the Less is More Act, the parole reform that was just signed by the governor. And the impact that has, right, on a judge's ability to sentence someone to Willard. Like, they've taken away that opportunity. So they've created this perfect opportunity for the state to say, population's already down, now we've taken away a judge's ability to utilize the services at Willard, so that's gonna drop the population anymore. So, hey, taxpayers, we're gonna save you money by closing this. But my question to all of you is, there have been dozens of prisons closed over the last decade. Have any of you seen a change in your taxes? Have you seen that savings? Has it been? No. And the other thing that has gone on for years that Phil and I have talked about, yelled about, screamed about, we've walked the picket lines with NYSCOBA, we've done the press conferences with them, is that for years the state has refused, even though the money was in the state budget to fill corrections officers' positions, they've let those positions go vacant. They haven't filled those positions. Again, so I think that they could add to the story about, well, the number of incarcerated individuals has decreased, we don't need as many corrections officers, and therefore we could continue to close these facilities. They make the data speak however they want it to. They manipulate it.
That's so true. I mean, even when talking with NYSCOBA, but they have people working mandatory double shifts because they don't have the staff. They were screaming for staffing and they're not providing it. It wouldn't surprise me, like Senator Helming said, they can keep the numbers down, and then when they close down a facility, then they have places to move these individuals into or use that. I have some numbers that I had at the time of the announcement. There was 173 individuals, but a total capacity of 664. We should be, with the success of Willard and other facilities like SHOP, those types of programs, they should be expanding those opportunities for individuals because of the success they've had. Unfortunately, they haven't, and now they're going to be transferring to other facilities. The other thing that I think that's missing in this discussion that had been included in previous closure announcements and closures is the state was provide incentive money, dollars for economic development, for repurpose and reuse. There is no funding in the budget to help repurpose and reuse these facilities or any of these closures, which is contradictory to what they've done in the past. So basically, they're just gonna leave these local communities high and dry. And in the past, at least they tried to provide them the money, and some of them they have converted, but it's a really poor track record. When 29 facilities have closed since 2009, and 8 have been sold or repurposed. Well, and some of them haven't even done anything. But where's the money to help these local communities get through this process that has been at least promised and pledged in the past? We should be providing some dollars to help these communities now. And that's something we need to go back and push back on as well, because this should have been included with the budget, which the Democratic majority and the governor approved. Of course,
I had no idea that judges could no longer sentence people.
Yeah, that's new, that's the less is
That
more
makes
act.
much
I don't, if these numbers jive with Phil's or not, but right now I have, according to docs, that there are 168 individuals that are incarcerated right now at Willard, that it's so far below the capacity of 664 individuals. But yeah, we talked about the ripple effects, everybody's mentioned it, everyone's talked about the impacts to the community. I think Phil is right. I think that's where our focus needs to be on right now, is what exactly does the community need? Knowing that this closure is going forward, what do we need? The schools are impacted, right? When they lose students, their formulas for calculating how much aid they're gonna receive is partially based on census, right? How many students? You're gonna be impacted. We should make sure January starts the budget talks, that we're saying these communities that have been impacted by the closure of the prisons, they need assistance. You know, they need a special tier classification. We should be making sure that the sewer project
I'm
that,
thinking the same way, Senator.
yeah, that Chairman Heisen is pushing, we should make sure that gets done. The water project, we should be talking about, came up on the call, around the water treatment plant, I believe it is, there are a number of dilapidated, collapsing buildings. There's it's about 100,000 square.
According to the docs at the last meeting that we had with them for the water plant, they plan on footing the bill for the entire upgrade. So that's bringing the plant back up to full speed, but that doesn't help anything around it.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
It's, you know, there's, you know, they talk about one new line that goes in, but everything from there on up, all that stuff is all old stuff. That's, if you don't have money built up with, through O&M, you can't replace it when it goes back because you have no funds to replace it with.
Yeah.
So it's not only a matter of them just helping you get it started, there's nobody there to maintain it. There's no funds available to maintain it.
And not to sound like a broken record, that's why I think it is critically important that we capture that level of detail. We get it memorialized, we get it in writing, so that the assemblymen and I can present that back to the state. And time is of the essence, right? Right now we have their attention, the budget's just around the corner. We need that level of detail from the community so we can go back and say, here's the list of what the community needs.
And to add on to that, Dave, and I haven't had to talk to you about it yet, but that's a pretty large plant and it's quite expensive to operate, and, you know, it's probably gonna cost more than a normal plant would just to use it for a little bit of the hamlet. So that's something also is, you know, you have a plant to run, but that plant's gonna cost twice as much as a normal plant because you've got twice as much, you
Well,
know.
we're looking at when the state redoes the plant, is have it still, that it can be, part of it can be used at the level we need, and if you grow, then you could turn up the other part. So you can run it at a smaller level and not have to pay for a large facility and keep dumping water back into the lake because it's treated, but it's only good for so long. You gotta keep rotating it. So we don't wanna throw the water away, but we wanna have the capacity there. If it's there, rebuild it to the capacity, but so we can stage it. Two different stages, one level and then a second.
And someone mentioned, and I think this is important for the schools as well as for the towns and also the county, is to get as much of that property as we can back on the tax rolls so that you can see some property tax benefits.
Well, if you're not gonna pay salaries, you might as well get something, because you gotta replace the salaries of the people that were there, that were paying taxes, that are no longer here but paying taxes. It's not gonna be there anymore.
Yeah, the ripple effect,
So
for sure.
it's,
We talked a little bit about transparency, but you guys, whoever wants to answer this, how did you find out that Willard was due to be closed?
Finger Lakes one.
Finger Lakes one.
I found out through the media, instantly called the acting commissioner and asked them what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
And I think he was a little embarrassed. I think they've known for a long time and they've been plotting it, and there was a leak that got out to the media. And it's extremely frustrating to me. You know, I'm gonna be honest and say I was thankful when Governor Cuomo left office, and I was hopeful when we had a new governor come in, especially when she started talking from day one about transparency, being open, communicating. There have been, this is not the one and only issue, there have been so many examples of missed opportunities to have open conversations, whether it's with the state electeds who represent the area, the community that's going to be impacted. This was just rushed through, it was misguided, and it's absolutely wrong. To find out through the media
Yeah.
that the third largest employer in the community is closing,
Yes.
no, not good.
I did invite someone from Anucci's office, the acting director of the Department of Corrections, and they declined to send anyone. And I did invite people from Niscoba, but they didn't get back to me. I thought we might get somebody down here.
Actually, I did talk to someone from NICE, where they had some meetings going on
Oh,
the
yeah?
executive meetings, so. But yeah, and I think that's the other thing, and even in the conversation I had with Commissioner Newey, I'm sure at Senator Home, they always express how regretful they are, and they know the impact of the community. It's BS. I mean, then put your money where your mouth is. Honor these commitments, put the investments back into the community,
Mhm.
help these towns where the water and the sewer and things of this nature, and look at these formulas. I think that's why this looking and memorializing and putting these specific ideas in place that we need to go forward with this governor and with this administration, because this is devastating, and this makes absolutely no sense. But those investments that were made and those incentives that were provided years ago for prison areas that had prison closures, why aren't we doing it here for Willard and other facilities?
Yeah, I've heard these comments from people in the community, things like that too. I've got a couple quotes up here, and I'll take the time to read them because you all don't have them in front of you. One is from Acting Commissioner of DAX, Anthony Annucci, and the other one is from our Assemblyman, Phil Palmisano. So the incarcerated population has continued to decline significantly, and we must efficiently deploy our allocated staff and resources while also operating the state prison system in a safe and appropriate manner. So that's what the acting commissioner of the Department of Corrections has to say about these type of closures. Well, our assemblyman says, how is it with even fewer inmates that dangerous violence and assaults inside our correctional facilities continue to rise? So our sort of two statements that seem in some ways in opposition to each other. What do you guys make of this? Or what are your thoughts concerning the parolees? And we talked a little bit about that Less is More Act.
I think the first quote makes a great soundbite,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's all it is a soundbite.
And actually, I would say, I don't think that the acting commissioner and Assemblyman Palmisano are necessarily on different pages. The commissioner really recently put out a report that he sent a letter to every single inmate in the New York State system talking about the horrendous violence, referring to it as the most savage violence that he has seen in his 40-plus years within the system. It's just really concerning that he would still support the consolidation of incarcerated individuals when we see these dramatic spikes in inmate-on-inmate violence, inmate-on-employees violence. And it's just, when you bring that up and ask, they say, well, we have space enough. You know, they give you the numbers about the number of beds that are available. But I think what's contributing to the spikes too is like the state of New York continues to take away the tools that corrections officers and law enforcement have to do their jobs. I think the Assemblyman mentioned the HALT legislation, which takes away the ability to use the specialized housing units, right? When we're in Albany, they do these demonstrations. They talk about solitary confinement, not the specialized housing units. and they bring this wooden box and they put it in the legislative office building where we all have to pass through, and they tell everyone, this is what solitary confinement like. It's a box with one little tiny cutout at the very top. And you try to tell them, that's not the truth. Look, I visited the shoes, 5 Points, Auburn's Correction Facility, and others. They're regular cells. You know what? Last time I was at Auburn, those in the shoe were happy to be there. They had big screen TVs, they were reading their books, they went out for their showers, they had a lot of attention. It's nothing like the made up untruth, the lies that are promoted by some elected officials. So I'm going to keep saying this over and over again. Elections have consequences. And a lot of people used to say, well, upstate elected officials get it. It's all driven by New York City. I am telling all of you that is not the case anymore. Look at how the legislators in the Assembly and the Senate from the Rochester area voted. Look over to our neighbors in Syracuse and look at how they voted. And if you don't like how they voted, if you don't like what's happening, then you need to talk to your family and your friends and others and let them know what's happening and get them registered to vote and get them out to vote.
Yeah, just on the violence issue again, and this is a huge problem, as Senator Helmy said. Again, from the past 5 years, inmate on staff assaults have increased over 38%. They went from 759 to 1,047 over the past 5 years, and they're up over 1,000 already again this year before the end of the year. Inmate assaults are up over 31.6% since 2015. It's been consistently over 1,000 per year for the past 5 years, and continuing to rise. And the HALT legislation that passed, took away a major tool for our corrections officers to keep not just themselves safe, but other inmates safe. The advocates and the Democratic legislators said this was solitary confinement or torture. Solitary confinement basically means you have no interaction with anyone. They see medical, they see pastoral, mental health counseling, they have educational people come through, they have library services, they have people come through on a regular basis. Plus they have access to pretty much unlimited iPad use for phone calls. And I remember the commissioner at one point saying they chalked up, when we were talking about this, like over 1 million hours worth of use. When he said, guess how much hours they use it? I said, a couple 100,000. Over 1 million hours worth of use. So these individuals are not isolated. They have plenty of benefits in the side of the facilities. But you take away those tools and resources from our corrections officers, it takes away their ability to be safe, not just for themselves, but for the individuals, other inmates who are in the facility as well.
Mm-hmm. Just real quick too, it's talking about taking away the tools, and I keep going back to less is more too. I think it's important to share that many of our colleagues in Albany feel that parole should not exist. They feel that somebody violates the law, they're sentenced, they're incarcerated for whatever length of time, and when that length of time is over, they're finished. There should not be parole. For me, I have talked to many people who have been on parole who said that was their lifeline, right? That's what kept them, that's what helped them the transition from being incarcerated to being out in the community on their own. It was a connection to services they needed. The check-ins were helpful to them. And this misguided notion that parole officers are out there like waiting for someone to violate parole, to miss curfew by 2 minutes, and then they're going to be sent back to prison. It is not true. It's not true. Because parole officers, just like corrections officers, the number of vacancies in the state is tremendous. Parole officers now have, on average, more than 50 cases each. They should have less than half of that. They don't have time to monitor minor violations. They're looking for the people who do something that really impacts public safety, and to get them back, whether it's to a place like Willard or whether it's to the prison.
And I don't want to go too much off topic, but just to say what's at stake, when Senator Helmy talks about elections have consequences and the policies that are advancing, we heard less is more, which is signed into law. There's one proposal out there right now by a senator from New York City that wants to get rid of mandatory minimum sentencing, saying that judges should have more discretion. So if you commit a rape and are sentenced to 15 to 30 years in prison, you shouldn't have a minimum of 15 years in prison. You should, the judge should have discretion to, after, kind of judge that individual and see if they should be not in prison. Well, prison is part of a punishment. Yes, there's rehabilitation, but there's also a punishment for a crime that you commit and be accountable to the public. And the senator advocating this said these policies are racist. And I said, I was talking to you yesterday, I'm sorry, if you brutally rape and murder a child, I don't care what the color of your skin is, you should be in prison for a very long time, and for many people, obviously, for the rest of your life, and should never see the light of day. But to use race as in the minimum sentencing and to take away mandatory minimum, I mean, people who murder should be in jail, period. Someone who abuses and murders and rapes a child should be in jail, period. They're talking about elder parole. Says if just because you turn 55 and you've served 15 years of your sentence in prison, that you should automatically come up for parole. So basically, if you're 40 years old and you brutally murder or rape a child, and you're sentenced to 30 years to life in prison, after 15 years, you would automatically come up for parole. And I remember we discussed this bill in committee. They go, well, that doesn't mean they're going to get out. Oh, come on, please.
Yeah.
What it does mean is that you
But
have
the
to put
same
that,
people who are passing those laws are also appointing the parole board members.
Exactly.
So you could see how this is all
and
moving.
then on check parole board, I mean, but what you do, even if they don't get out, you put that family through that, and you live in that horrible ordeal. Every 2 years, we have a family in Savona, the Roby family, whose son, Derek, was murdered, and they went through parole 11 times, and the individual, Derek Smith, who killed their son, was just recently released, or announced his release from the parole board. Cop killers, child rapists, murderers are being released hand over fist. Sentences are being commuted by the past governor and this governor.
I don't want to go too far in the weeds either,
Yeah.
but just something else along those lines, so you know, like the level of detail that we're fighting and battling every day. So Phil mentioned how families who are the victims, right? They have to go through this parole hearings every 2 years. We carry legislation to extend that to 5 years. But interesting to note, I had a situation, horrendous situation in Palmyra and Wayne County. But anyway, every 2 years, the family fights the release of the person who murdered their 15-month-old grandson, stabbed him brutally to death after he killed the babysitter. But the grandparents who spent a considerable amount of time with their grandson, he lived with them part of this time, they're not considered members of the family by the state's definition. So every 2 years, when the parole board takes testimony, they only take testimony from family members. Those grandparents can't testify. It's just wrong. There's so many things about the system that's wrong. But what we hear so much about, and I think it ties back to the prison closure, is about the rights of those who are incarcerated, right? That seems to be where the focus is instead of the crime victims.
Yes, absolutely. The policies promoted by this administration and past administration and the Democratic majorities in Albany side with the favor of the criminal and the inmate versus crime victims or families in public safety. You see it in bail reform. You see it in the parole reform. We were talking about this. We have a bill and it will give discretion to the parole board to consider making that minimum status instead of every 2 years up to 5 years. But they don't want to give discretion to the parole board on that case because they think it would be an inconvenience to the inmate. But yet, for someone who commits murder and is sentenced to 15, or murders or rapes someone and is sentenced to 15 to 30 years, they don't want to have mandatory minimum sentencing. So that just shows the priorities are not with crime victims or families in public safety. It's more with criminals and inmates, and that's unfortunate.
So, we've been talking a little bit about NYSCOBA, which is the New York State Correctional Officers and Police Benevolent Association. The president of NYSCOBA said about the closure, sadly, it's at the expense of the hardworking men and women of NYSCOBA. So has anyone heard about the plans for the corrections officers that'll be displaced? I've heard they'll be reassigned, but my question is, if we're closing this many prisons, how will we have enough jobs for these people in the state, in other correctional facilities?
We'll have enough jobs because there are so many open positions, but the one thing that, there are many things that are troubling to me, but one thing here locally is so that the people who are losing their jobs at Willard, right, based on seniority, and their contract agreements with their union and everyone, they'll be given the opportunity to bump other people. That includes people at 5 points. So I mean, it's almost like in some ways that this could be a double whammy, right? But they'll go through their contractual agreements and they'll follow the process so that people will have opportunities to apply for other jobs. It's just that we're closing so many upstate facilities year after year after year that people who have chosen to live in this area, they like the upstate lifestyle. I think that some of them will probably be forced to move downstate.
Yeah, and I do know, I think the meetings took place, I believe, with NYSCOBA and Docs with the employees last week there, and even the civilian, people were there as well for the civilian staff. But Senator Humvey's right, I mean, this is not, you don't know what's gonna happen with them, and then you don't necessarily have facilities nearby, and then this closure's happening in less than 120 days from the time of announcement. That's not enough time for a family to make a decision whether I'm gonna uproot my family and move and locate to another area, or have to drive 2 or 3 hours to work, because that's what's happening now.
Yeah.
So the administration could say, everyone's gonna have a job, but we can pray. The way you set this up, you set it up to fail, and then they walk away just like they walk away from the people, just like they walk away from the buildings, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. And I have a bunch of friends and family that work at Willard, and they've had their meetings, and they are bumping their friends from 5 points who now, before Christmas are finding out that, I just got bumped out of my job. Now I'm the one that has to relocate. It's not even my facility that's closing, or, which is something I think that, the state depends on. They decide, all right, I'm going into another career field because I'm just not going to move 4 hours away with my family, and, there's other jobs out there. So, yeah, they do have jobs for everybody, but I don't think they anticipate everybody to take those jobs.
The domino effect of it all, too.
Yeah.
Now, do you two, as superintendents of the schools, are you hearing things from families about, the corrections officers that may have children in the district, or?
I mean, sure, these are people, it's already been said, their parents, their coaches, their volunteers, these are the families of the people that walk our halls every day. And I just keep coming back to this idea of interconnectedness. And I like the thought of memorializing the feedback, because there's 1,000 different ways that, when you close a facility like that and eliminate the 300 jobs, it ripples through everything. In the last year and a half of the pandemic has taught us how interconnected we are across sectors, from education to healthcare to mental health to housing to drug and alcohol rehabilitation. Across the board, we all rely on each other. So, I think it was Mike that used the term stunned, and to just process the idea that this is all happening on March 10th, so fast that the jobs disappear. I've been grateful to be able to participate for the last year and a half in the One Seneca group that meets weekly to talk about economic development in the county. We've had a lot of conversations over the last year about infrastructure, water and sewer that's been mentioned, broadband access, so everything is connected to everything else. Just the thought of that facility itself sitting there and rotting is really upsetting. When you ask all these questions about where will the people go, that's the $1 million question. Marty has already mentioned, it's not as if we can absorb them in the schools. Half of our annual budget is salaries and benefits. We take that very seriously. Again, I think in the last year and a half, I myself personally have never been so aware of our role as an employer in the schools, because of the way that COVID has affected leave time and quarantines and just the impact on a day-to-day basis of waiting for the result of a test. And so we've managed through all of these, new thinking about the way that an employer works with employees. And so when 300 jobs just go away in the flash of an eye, it's going to have a major impact across everything. So Marty and I have also sat once a month on a crisis intervention team in the county, that, gathers law enforcement with mental health, just to talk about trends. None of this will make it any better. It's only gonna make it worse. And so, our mission in the schools has become much more than just reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's care for families, it's connection to services, it's networking across all of these different sectors. And so when you ask if we've been hearing the stories, yes, we've been hearing the stories.
If I could add on.
People are afraid, people are upset. Nobody knows what they're gonna do in just a few months. So, and this idea that we're gonna bump friends from their jobs, think of how upsetting that is.
Right, and that mental stress, that mental anguish, I mean, we've seen the dramatic increase, right? Not only among adults during this COVID pandemic, with all the uncertainty, the loss of jobs, but with our kids. I mean,
Pretend that doesn't ripple down to the kids.
exactly. And now this stress that, their parents, no matter how much they keep it away from the kids feel it, sense it. And there was a comment made earlier that I think about the governor and making sure that there are services available. I could not disagree more. The crisis intervention team training, that's something that we fight for every year. Since we've had one party control in the state of New York, that funding for CIT training in upstate areas has been cut dramatic. And that's crucial. That is so critical, getting all of these disciplines together to talk about how to handle the mental health crisis situations that we had. I had a call from a hospital CEO who reached out. They had a child, an 11-year-old, who was in the emergency department for more than 5 days. She had behavioral issues, mental health issues, living with the grandmother. The grandmother needed help. There was nowhere to go. She wound up in the ED, wound up sitting there for 5 days because at the same time that we're destroying people's lives through challenging public safety and everything, we're taking away resources, we're taking away mental health funding, we're taking away behavioral health, drug treatment opportunities. It makes no sense, All that money that we've been saving supposedly from prison closures prior to this year, where is it? Has that been put back into mental health services? Has that been put back in to help the schools? Or where is it? I mean, we already know it's not gone back to the taxpayers, so I think you hit the nail on the head saying like this is one giant puzzle where all the pieces have to fit together. We have to be in balance. And I'm not seeing that at all. I'm not seeing that.
I just came this morning from a different workshop on foundation aid in the state, related to aid coming to schools. So much of it based on enrollment. And so, the prospect of losing more enrollment has an effect that way as well. So Pam and Phil are going to have a few more appointments with us about talking about the impact on state aid coming up in the next state budget, and maybe exploring the ways that schools can try to absorb some of this and offer more. It's a mystery to me how that might happen, but the conversation has to take place because these are people. They're people that we know and love, that we've worked with for all these years, generations of people in Seneca County. This is their lifeblood. So it's not as simple as just saying I'll relocate to Plattsburgh or something.
Is there anything you wanted to add, Martin?
Yeah, I'd like to continue with Steve's theme of the interconnectedness and remind everybody that even prior to this announcement, our area is still recovering from bruises for the last 20 years of losses that were mentioned, other places closing, and even if you're not one of those individuals who's been delivered the bad news, the municipalities, it's kind of a sad irony that for communities that are nestled between two beautiful collections of fresh water, the infrastructure for water is something that we suffer.
Yeah.
And the townships down here have been battling with that for years. Schools are fortunate to be made whole in their tax bills by reserves from the county. I'm not sure that exists for the towns. And when people leave, the rest of the rates for water and maintaining systems and things like that are inherited by those that are left behind. So it's a really complex problem. And to think that that doesn't impact what's on families' minds and how well they're able to function or that kids can succeed in schools is a fallacy. It impacts everybody. And so I feel too for the townships that are, it's kind of a model that we have in our county, that some of these infrastructures have been supported by partnerships with large entities like state parks or docks or others. And when they leave, the people that remain have to try to pay for the costs of those things, and water and sewer is a big one right now.
But that, to me, that's another example, right, of a great learning opportunity, that when local government engages in, whether it's infrastructure, whatever it is, negotiations with the state or any other entity, that you make sure that you have someone, you know, who's really good at legal language and protects your community, so that if someone pulls out, and it doesn't have to just be like a state agency, it could be a big box store who's coming to your community, who's gonna contribute to infrastructure, whether it's water, sewer, whatever it is. You need to have a contingency plan, so if and when they do pull out, your residents don't bear the consequences of that.
Yeah. I think in terms of that big Bitcoin mining operation in Dresden, how would they play out that same sort of scenario? Yeah. We did touch a little bit about Oasis and the possibility of reuse of the facility. What I've heard time and again from patrons coming here is, how could they consider closing Willard when substance abuse is on the rise? And it's increasing locally. So, has anyone heard anything about the possibility of repurpose?
Well,
I know we
yeah,
talked
well,
about that a little.
What people don't understand is there's two things. One is the docks and Oasis. They're two separate organizations in the state. So just because the docks is closing down doesn't mean Oasis is gonna go away or doesn't. But it's early enough in the stage where nobody really knows exactly what Oasis wants to do at the time.
Could I interject? That's not quite true. 30 years of working for Van Dyke ATC, I was around in '95 when some unelected Albany bureaucrat decided to close Willard Psych Center. Van Dyke relied on Willard for their services, their food,
Yeah.
their support, all that stuff. They still do.
Yep.
You close Willard drug treatment, where's Van Dyke gonna go? They're gonna close too. Now, Van Dyke services not just Seneca County, they service 14 upstate counties, from Lake Ontario to the Pennsylvania border, from Syracuse to Rochester. Where are those people gonna get their services if Van Dyke closes because Willard closes? So you're talking about ripple effect.
Ripple effects, domino effect.
You know, that is something that Oasis
Well, what I'm
may
saying
or
is,
may not,
is
you
that
know, care about.
what I'm saying is that the docks, I realize the docks supports Oasis through the food and their infrastructure, all their sewer, water, all this stuff's taken care of from the state. It's still part of the state, but the docks is gonna do what the docks is gonna do.
Oh, yeah.
Oasis is gonna have to do what they have to do. So the problem we have is that whether we want Oasis to stay or not, something has to happen to make them stay as far as their infrastructure. We talked a lot so far today about all the stuff about corrections and how it's gonna impact the guards and all the stuff. The community, those of us in the community, we aren't leaving. I don't work there. I have to take care of the people that are here. The people in my town, and I know Joe feels the same, the people that are staying, we have to figure out as a community what is going to happen at that. Forget the fact that the docks is leaving, they're gone. So we have to get past that, find somebody today that wants to come in, whether they do a lease agreement with the state of New York or whatever has to be done, we have to do. We have to find somebody. People here, this area of this beautiful land we have between lakes, the problem is there's only two ways in, and it's to the north and the south. You can't come in any other way. So it's hard to bring an industry in because there's only two ways in. Whatever they do, they have to go up and over or down and over. They can't go side to side. So Oasis is there, part of it. We need to figure out how we can get the Oasis to stay more support it in another way, whether it be with food, I don't know myself, but we gotta keep what's there, something's gotta stay there. The buildings that are run down, the reason they don't wanna touch them is because of the asbestos. It's millions of dollars to clean them up. You know what, the cheapest way to clean the building up is wait for it to fall on the ground. When it falls on the ground, you spray water on it, pick it up, take it up to the landfill. It's good.
It's too bad the building will last forever.
Right, but that's the problem, see?
Yeah.
So when the building falls down, somebody will clean it up. As long as it's standing, it's too expensive. Nobody wants to touch it because of the asbestos. So, we gotta deal with what we got. I mean, I know it's sad that the guards are moving. It was the same moving the federal government moved. You work for a government, or you work for the state, or you work for any place like that, it's so large, eventually it's gonna start moving, things are gonna move. You're gonna either have to figure out whether you're gonna move with it, or you're gonna find another line of work. But it's large, super large agencies, that's the problem with all of them.
Well,
You know,
also,
it's just the way, we gotta figure out what we're
let's
gonna
not
do today.
forget that all this responsibility sits on the governor's desk because the commissioners of Oasis and Docks, they are employed at the behest of the governor.
That is an excellent
Okay.
point.
So, right,
So if they don't toe the line, they're out of a job.
And just,
They run scared.
Oasis, I mean, those conversations are underway to get them to expand. Again, that's just one small part of the answer, but Dave made a point earlier about how long it takes to transition properties, right? And that's why it's so important, again, I'm gonna go back and harp on that, we memorialize everything that the county, that's important to the county and the town and the community, because there are multiple agencies who are gonna be involved at the state level. Docks, they're gonna shutter the place, right? And it's gonna be transferred over to the Office of Governmental Services, OGS. Then they're gonna have to take over management. And anything that has to do with economic development is gonna involve ESD, Empire State Development. So there's a lot of red tape, right? But I think if we can be clear and concise in what all of our requests are, and then Phil and I, we know which agencies to filter that to and which agencies to ride for that, it'd be very helpful if we had that clear, concise list from everyone.
Which I think again is why it's important, which is kind of shocking. We usually in the past, when in previous closures, there would be some of that. It hasn't been in the last few times. No incentive money or helpful money to help repurpose it. There was millions of dollars that they used to have available that no one even talking about or even offering on. That's unacceptable in and of itself. On top of the closure.
at this library, we're fortunate to have a wonderful archivist and genealogical room and archives here. And so I've heard a lot about the history of this facility. And I think we've talked some about the plans for the future, what they would look like in terms of how long it would take and the different entities that would be involved. And that the state surely bears some type of responsibility. But, you know, at the same time, we see those buildings falling in on themselves from the last time. So this is one of the largest concerns I've heard from patrons coming into the library. What's going to happen to those buildings, and what accountability would the state have for that?
Let's see.
Well, unfortunately, we have a constant reminder of what happens when a facility is emptied. Every time you drive by the depot and watch those buildings just collapsing in on themselves because they've been abandoned.
So very true.
Well, just remember, we just finished recently, it took 30 years to get rid of the government to finally give up the land. 30 years. So if you think the state of New York's gonna be any faster, good luck. They still have them because they can't get rid of the property in any other way, and it takes them so long to do it that people become disinterested in it. And then then you're desperate for anything that you can take. And it's the truth, it's just not fair, but it's the truth, it's how it works.
We have a lot of entities within our community that are tax supported in different ways or are reliant upon gifts within the community, like our local governments and our schools. Even the library, part of our budget is based on getting tax money from the municipalities, the county, and then we hold a vote that is on the ballot, and then the total amount is divided amongst the total assessed population or property values within the area. So Romulus and Ovid that we're targeted to. So in turn, it will have impact on the library and our funding. and possible, tax levies that we put up there. And things like the food pantry and the thrift store that is heavily used here. So these are all things to talk about in terms of the negative impact on the community. And this is the other thing I hear the most from people is, what will happen to our businesses? I put some of the logos of the local ones right around here. I did invite a couple of the local business owners from Riley's Place and the Big M and...
I did just have a conversation with Sue Sorencio.
Yeah.
So she has connected.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
yep. And the owners of the coffee house and the Italian kitchen, people here, right in with my own staff, utilize many of these. So, I don't know if any of you have anything else you want to add about the impact on the community and the businesses. We've covered a lot of it. I do want to give a
I've got
couple-
one thing I just
yeah.
wanted to add. So everybody focuses on the March date, but, and in people's mind, it's like March, everybody's out of a job, but it's already started. Like Willard, they run a 90-day program. They're not putting anybody else in, and every 2 weeks they graduate a group, and when that group leaves, people leave with them. So,
Right.
by March, that's going to be empty. It's not like if somebody's flicking a switch in March. It's already started. It's already happened, and
Trickling.
I'm betting to see, probably January or February, that facility will probably be almost empty. They say March, but that's when they want to shut the doors, turn the lights out and be out of there. So, it's a lot sooner than March if you take the thought process of they're moving them out now and, the employees go with them now.
And I would say, as far as like supporting local businesses, that's on every single one of us, right? To make sure that we shop local, that we support local, that we purchase locally produced items that whenever we can. At the state level, I am an ardent supporter. I carry numerous pieces of legislation to support American-made products, right? The state of New York should be purchasing American-made. For instance, flags, there is so much more that we should be doing. And here locally, I think it's incumbent upon everyone to do everything you can to promote these local businesses. I'll give you one example. I do try and do everything I can. I hold mobile office hours throughout the 6 communities that I represent. I held one down at the Seneca Coffee Shop.
Mm-hmm.
Now, am I waiting to get my wrist slapped by the state saying that, hey, you shouldn't be promoting local businesses, but we're going to continue to do that kind of stuff to promote local businesses, because when we hold these mobile office hours in local businesses, we use our social media, we reach over 10,000 people, letting them know about these businesses. Joe and I, we did get our hands slapped a little bit at the beginning of the pandemic.
We did, yes.
We tried to support a local diner that was struggling through the pandemic. They reopened. We scheduled a big meeting there. We had a nice breakfast meeting, and then we made a mistake. We literally stood up from our seats. We snapped a photo. Again, I put it on Facebook to try and promote the local business, and our mask may not have been on. And
But we legally ate breakfast and talked for an hour while sitting down. But once we stood up, the COVID was going to attack us, and it generated hundreds and hundreds of very bad comments. And
but the business did get, attention, right? They did get, people did learn about Ovid, downtown Ovid. Yeah.
Well, this slide really, again, hammers home the whole interconnected nature.
Yeah.
I mean, a correction officer loses his job, his family moves away. He's no longer patronizing these establishments. These establishments can't employ as many people as they used to, so those people lose their jobs and potentially have to move away. And it hits the businesses, it hits the schools, it hits the community, it hits the tax base. It's just a massive